And now we will start the panel 3, Migration in the EU, Internal Challenges and Policy Responses. So I would like to invite Professor Rinus Pennings once again as our moderator. Dr. Alexandra Szczerba-Zawada unfortunately will not join us today, but her speech will be available online after the conference. Professor Małgorzata Dziembała, Dr. Karolina Sobczak-Szelc, and Mr. Diego Caballero Velez. So please. And now, so two more minutes. Okay. So now I would like to invite Professor Rinus Pennings as our moderator. So we have 1 hour for the panel number 3.
Thank you very much. This is not an easy task, particularly because we are between you and your lunch. But we'll do our best, and I'll do my best to be as short as possible to introduce the speakers. The first announcement was already made that Alexandra Szczerba-Zawada is not here, so she will not present. We will have 3 presentations. Professor, and I'm going to give an exercise to my Polish. Professor Małgorzata Dziembała, yes, she is going to introduce she's going to be our first speaker. She is from the Faculty of Economics of the University of Katowice, is that right? And she speaks on the role of the EU financial support for the integration of migrants and refugees in the member states. I'll immediately announce also the second and the third one that will follow so that I don't have to take time in between. So the second presentation will be Dr. Karolina Sobczak-Szelc, yes, University of Warsaw, and she will speak on the multi-level governance of mass migration in Europe and beyond. And then we have Mr. Diego Caballero Velez. This is easier for me to pronounce since my Spanish is a little bit better than my Polish. He will speak on refugee protection in the EU, German, Italian, and Polish ruling political parties' perceptions of refugee protection in a global public good. Okay, we're going to listen first to Professor Małgorzata Dziembała. Please.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much once again for inviting me here and to give a presentation devoted to the role of the EU's financial support for integration of migrants and refugees in the member states. I am representing the University of Economics in Katowice, Faculty of International Economic Relations. And my presentation will focus, first I will start with introduction, then I will define the problem and methodology which I applied. Then I focus on the financial instruments which support migrants, and I will focus also on the projects which social innovation projects, because these are the new kinds of projects which quite innovative, which supports this group of people. And finally, I will end up my presentation with conclusions. And of course, may I start with introduction with the quotation that Europe is built on migration. In fact, it is, because Europe nowadays faces many challenges, and migrants are needed for the economic growth of Europe. So we need to cope with migration, and we need to solve the problems of migrants, of asylum seekers, and of refugees. And the question is, how many of you feel we do enough to support refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants? And I will try to answer this question. And first of all, to present the resources, the funding resources which support this kind of which support migrants, and also programs which the aim of which is to solve the problems of migrants, and also some of them can be described as social innovation. So what is the aim of the article? So the main of the paper is to present the EU financial support and also to discuss the importance of social innovations in the integration of these population groups. And also I'm argued that social innovations in support of refugees and asylum seekers should be applied to either contexts, contributing to more effective solutions for the integration of these communities in the European Union. And to start with, to present the sources of financial support for this group of people. And the migration crisis in the European Union has made it necessary to find a proper solution for the implementation of the joint program on migration. And also some 4 pillars of migration management has been identified, and it was also associated with some different funding mechanism related to migration, refugees, and asylum seekers. And I will focus only on, because there are a wide variety of funding mechanisms, and I will focus only on the European Union funds, namely the European Social Fund, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, and Fund for European Aid to Most Deprived People, and also the other funds related to agriculture and to fishing sectors. But we must bear in mind that there are a wide variety of mechanisms which can be used and which can be applied and to support migrants. Let me start with the European Social Fund. And the European Social Fund is one of the structural funds and one of the major financial instruments of the cohesion policy. And it was stated in the provision of this fund that it promote, of course, promote the employment, promote access of people to the labor market, and also it focus also on the social inclusion and promote gender equality, non-discrimination and equal opportunities. In this way, this fund make a contribution to economic, social, and territorial cohesion. And of course, and from our point of view, we take into the consideration the situation of migrants. So we should focus on the objective that this social fund supports. I mean, it supports social inclusion. Social inclusion. So in fact, this European Social Fund supports the integration of refugees and asylum seekers and integration into the labor market, as well as social inclusion. And it was also indicated that the share of funds which was allocated to each of the member states, about 20%, about 20% of these funds allocated to each of the member states should be spent on the social inclusion. And there are some themes of the structural funds. Among of them is the poverty and social inclusion investment priorities, and the social fund just support this priority to promote social inclusion, fight with poverty, and any forms of discrimination. And what in fact this fund is focused on, I mean, on active inclusion, social economic integration of the marginalized group, combating any form of discrimination, and equal chance promotion, facilitating access to services, and such kind activities. As regards the financial allocation, so the highest allocation was assigned to Poland, and then the funds went to Italy in terms of the biggest contribution, and then to Germany, Spain, and Portugal. So in fact, migrants can apply for this fund. When it's get this legal access to the labor market, and apart from that, if it refers to the if it refers to vocational training, and if it refers to the education of their children. So to sum up, the European Social Fund promotes the sustainable development, promoting social inclusion, promoting education and trainings, and from these financial resources, can be used by institutions which offered some financial assistance, like what I mentioned. And another fund which is allocated and through which the assistance is given to this group of people is the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived. And in fact, the aim of this fund is to alleviate the poverty. And what is the forms of assistance which is offered? So it is the food aid, basic financial assistance, and support given to social inclusions. And in fact, it is the assistance which is offered just as soon as these people cross the border, and it is granted after arrival into the European Union. And the institutions which apply for these funds may cover the cost of the purchase of food, basic material aid, and as well as the cost of transport of this food. And if you have a look, it is this financial assistance is implemented through the operational programs, and so we can see what types of assistance can be used by member states in terms of food, basic materials, and also there is another operational programs related to social inclusion, and it was used by the countries like Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden. And finally, we have also another fund. It is the Asylum, Migration, and Integration Fund, and the aim of which is to support the efficient management of migration flows and the implementation of the common asylum policy. So in fact, there are different strands of this fund to support to legal and labor market, and it is related to integration, to the improvement of the return strategy, and also to close cooperation between member states. Member states. So this is the third fund, and apart from them, there are any other funds because which are used. One of them is the European Regional Development Fund, another structure fund. So we can see that cohesion policy effectively and efficiently support this group of people. And not going into details about the provision of these funds, we can see what kind of activities this European Regional Development Fund include. supports urban regeneration, investment in education infrastructure, including schools, vocational schools. It's about social housing areas, including startup. So it is mostly related to the creation of the friendly environment. To friendly environment for this group of people. And what I would like to also to stress that the cohesion policy focus on cities. So in fact, the activities also includes some activities in the cities. I mean, namely in the urban areas, because these areas there are several problems, and of course, which they can be solved by the European Regional Development Fund. Apart from that, we can also distinguish the fund for agriculture, the fishing funds. So this funds also supports these activities for migrants as refugees and asylum seekers. And if we have a look at the types of the project which are supported, we can distinguish very quite innovative projects which are called the social innovation projects, because when we observe over the time that the systems evolved, namely at the beginning. After the member state focus on the financial, on the food, on the humanitarian aid, and then as soon as they get experience in this program implementation, they start to focus on quite different projects, which are called, which we can call also the social innovation projects. What in fact the social innovation? This is we can briefly say that it's that new ideas that work in meeting social goals. So, in fact, these are the projects which are implemented to meet social goals, and to meet social goals. And of course, there are some these projects are developed in some stages. And what about the social innovations which are related to this group of people? And this kind of projects focus on improving communication, so just to overcome barriers, language barriers, and to focus on matching offer and demand. In that sense, that there are several platforms to facilitate communication between asylum seekers and the communities or just institutions which provide some assistance, and also to create some interactions between the public services and the individuals, because the public service should know what in fact is required and demanding by these people, and also. This kind of projects focus also on the integration of migrants into the labor market. So that's why there are 4 aspects that should be taken into consideration, namely to promote the language skills, and qualification, also to involve partners in institutions and employers who should be interested in looking for and employing such people. And some examples of these projects which refer to social innovations, just to have a look just to give you a brief overview of what kind of projects these social innovations are. For example, these are the Chiron Open Higher Education Startup. It's a platform which the aim of which is to facilitate the access to education. And it's not related to university, but in fact it's offer different kind of education. So those people who has the legal status and people who entitled to take up and who can enter the labor market can use this platform. And there are also the platform and the mobile application, like a bureaucracy project. So the aim of which is to support migrants and this kind of people in solving some problems in Germany and related to this red tape bureaucracy problems. And also another another kind of project which can be called like social innovation, because some of them was awarded the first prize in the competition related to social innovation projects. And so it was like a project, the aim of which was to, there were families which were eager to accommodate refugees, asylum seekers, and at the beginning there were 15 families, and the number of families which were eager to take up in this project rose to 400 families. And to sum up, and so just to sum up and some conclusions concerning this presentation. So to sum up, we could say that it is necessary to pay attention to solving these problems, and so to support them financially. And as we realized, the financial support was implemented not only in the forms of food, but also should be offered in the long term. And in fact, I didn't give you the precise figures, because it is in fact it's difficult to estimate the amount of funds spent on migration from the EU funds, and the figures which I was looking for weren't precise. And so there are some suggestions, because the first evaluations appeared, so that the implementation of the EU migration-related programs may be slow. And so there are some problems which can be identified connected with the complexity of the EU accounting system, so that's why it is difficult to identify the best projects, and the coordination is insufficient. And there are some funds, but some of them are, in terms of scope of assistance, are overlapping. And as it was observed, some of these projects can be regarded as the innovative projects and refer to social innovations. And so there are some, of course, because they have been implemented for 3 or 5 years, so the experience is not too huge. However, there are some indicators, and what is stressed, that the success of such kind of projects should depend on the involvement of the refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in the project implementation. The best projects will be when there is a close cooperation between this community and the problems and the people which need this support. And I think, and so I believe that the role of social innovations and such kind of such kind of projects will increase, because the aim of these projects is to change the system and to bring about the systematic change. And as the migration is a challenge for the European Union, so in fact the European Union must do a great effort to cope with this problem, and these projects I think can address and could be could address this problem. So this was a really short presentation, but I think that it gives you an overview what kind of financial resources and what kind of projects are offered to this group of people. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We proceed immediately by a presentation by Caroline.
Thank you, Professor Phoenix. Thank you, Marta, for your invitation. It's an honor to be here and to have this possibility to present actually project in front of such audience. My name is Karolina Sobczak-Szelc. I am Assistant Professor in Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. And I've got pleasure to be a project investigator in Respond project. which full name is Multi-Level Governance of Mass Migration, Europe and Beyond. The idea of this project appeared actually in 2015, so it was already the moment when a huge number of people were moving towards Europe, looking for shelter and for the possibility to find safe place. And the aim of this project is to provide in-depth understanding of recent, especially forced migration and its consequences, in order to enhance the migration governance capacity, policy coherence of the EU, its member states, and third countries. And this general aim is followed by 7 objectives. And these are not in the order of how important those objectives are, but somehow how they appear in the project and in migration process. So the first objective, the systematic overview of contextual factors driving recent mass migration. I think that we have already a little bit talked about this today, but still there is a lot to do in this area. Then identifying existing governance capacities of countries that are transit countries or destination countries. Explore the integration capacity in selected countries, so those which take part in this project. Study the role of key non-governmental and civil actors. Outline and provide in-depth knowledge to the response to the recent mass migration. And comparative policy analysis regarding refugee responses and produce policy recommendations. As I've already said, this project is focused on forced migration, so we are not interested in all economical migration and so on. Those forced which started in 2011 and with emphasis on those situations, on what happened after 2015. I think that after our morning sessions, I don't need to justify why this time frame in this project. We focused on Eastern Mediterranean route, and this will be followed by partners in this project. We've got 14 partners from 11 countries, and researchers are from 7 disciplines. I've got honor to lead our Polish team. Marta and Konrad, which will present in the afternoon session, are part of this team. Beside us, the leader of all consortium is Uppsala University. And why this project is special, in my opinion, because it's as complex as it should be. It's multi-level and multi-dimensional in all aspects. So first of all, we've got 3 levels of analysis. Macro level, so this is supranational and national. Meso level, subnational, local political actors, local administratives and NGOs. And we look also deeper into those who are touched by our political decision or responses. So on micro level, these are individual asylum seekers and refugees. Then we are looking in 3 themes. So action, capacities of political initiatives, inaction, policy vacuum, and reaction, so interaction between macro, meso, and micro levels and actors. And finally, we are looking in 3 regional dimensions. So although we are not carrying our researches in source countries, still we are looking at reasons of migration. Then we are looking at transit countries, which are touched by those movements, and finally also on destination countries. The methodological approach is also very mixed, and I think that it would be really difficult to add there anything else. We use variety of quantitative and qualitative methods for data gathering. So there is legal and policy analysis, political claims analysis, discourse analysis, interview-based analyzing. So we carry interviews among refugees, local actors, NGO actors, focus groups and roundtables discussions. We are going to carry survey in Turkey and Sweden, and also not by Polish team, but by Turkish team and Great Britain's team. 2 additional issues will be done. It's a KINOI technique and project documentary. Till this moment, project started in December 2017, so we are almost in the middle of the project. We started and almost finalized fieldworks in 11 countries. We carried fieldworks in 66 cities with more than 750 stakeholders and refugees. As I've already said, we are focused on Eastern Mediterranean route, despite the survey which is just in 2 countries. During all project, we focus or take care of the ethical clearance. All partners applied for the approval from ethical commissions, and our restrictions in this area are quite strict, and we take care of the anonymity of all interviewees that take part in our project, and this is a huge challenge for us because we need also to take care from the one side on that we need to give proper results, on the other hand take care of the anonymity, and on the third side it's the issue of being a responsible researcher who shares his knowledge and somehow also results, which is actually at this moment the biggest challenge for us. So how we construct the project and which are our research areas. So we started with, let's call it work package because it's H2020 frame, exactly. We started with legal and policy framework of migration. This is already finished, and I can recommend 2 reports that appeared. Although all partners wrote national reports, I will recommend 2. The aim of this work package was to provide a contextual background analysis of mass migration and migration governance in each of engaged country. I didn't mention this, but Hungary is additional country from which we don't have partner. However, we do carry research there, and we also have country report from Hungary. So the first report is a comparative report based on those national reports, prepared mostly by Italian team. And I will recommend our work, or mostly Monika Szulecka work, who is the main author, but with our small participation, Polish or report about Polish situation. Then we have work package 2, which is dedicated to border management and migration control. Today, quite a lot was already said about border management. However, not so deep how we are trying to look into this in the frame of this project, because we aim to explore and analyze border management policies at macro, meso, and micro levels from the perspective of diverse actors implementing those policies, and the perspective of those affected by this implementation, so asylum seekers. And here we rely not only on the desk analysis, desk research, but we are also carrying field research and multi-level quantitative research. So we as an all consortium, we do research or in-depth interviews among asylum seekers, among border guards. There were some among even in Frontex by women. The third work package is about protection. And here we aimed also to examine the impact of recent migration movements and policies on asylum determination system and refugee protection regimes. And reception policies and practices as a response. And responses for this is the aim of work package, is the title of work package 4. And here we focus on the reception conditions and how the asylum seekers find themselves under reception conditions. Work package 5th is focused on integration policies, practices, and responses. And here it's not only about what kind of integration policies are implemented, but also how the asylum seekers and refugees respond for those possibilities that they receive. And we are looking at this in 5 main dimensions. That is labor market, education, housing and special integration, public mental health and religion, citizenship and belonging, and above all those is gender and vulnerability as a cross-sectional topic. Work Package 6 is dedicated for conflicted Europeization, and it's aimed to examine how elite discuss on increasing external migration to the EU, is framed in media and deliberated among stakeholders with regard to the cause of Europeanization. This work package is based mostly on legal and politics analysis, political claims, discourse analysis of public speeches and political documents, and looking at what happens in the frame of policy and politics. It's highly interesting. And the last in which we are, as Polish team, engaged, the survey study, which will be carried in Sweden and Turkey. And it's aimed to collect and analyze information about Syrians. So we are focused mostly on Syrians, refugees, experiences with respect to borders, refugee protection, reception, socioeconomic and sociocultural integration. So those quantitative data support all qualitative that we have received from in-depth interviews. But we are focused not only on the research. We try also to create discussion over the issue of immigration, refugee, and integration policies, exchange of experience in the field of forced migration management, and identify and develop the good practices regarding multi-level management of forced migration. And in order to do this, we as a consortium have created, or we are willing to create, kind of migration governance network, which will gather political actors, local administrators, and NGOs. Some of you have already heard or took part in our meeting. Already 11 migration governance network was already implemented in our partner countries. That was combined with kickoff events, roundtables, or open public seminars. And we are willing to increase also our spirit of this knowledge by exchanging between countries. We will do additional roundtable discussion in Brussels, which will be international. We will also write policy briefs, and we plan to organize Project Final conference in Göteborg in 2020. And finally, just to let me say the final word, also as not only to carry research, as a Respond team, we already established 2 advice or service hubs, one in Turkey, in Istanbul, and second in Iraq, in Baghdad. Those 2 hubs aims to help somehow asylum seekers or refugees respond for their needs, but also establish links between scientific community, stakeholders, and refugees. In case of Iraqi, it's quite often internally displaced person. Let me finish here. If you are willing to receive any more information, especially we publish them on our webpage with blogs which are posted every month, or 2 months. Every 2 months, okay, Marta knows it better. And also all our reports are published there. For sure at academia. Thank you very much.
Now we have the last one.
Thank you very much, Professor Phoenix, for the introduction. And it's a very pleasure to be here. I would like to thank especially Marta Pakochka because she has given me the opportunity to be here and to present what is part of my research PhD project, because I'm a PhD candidate in political science, international relations, and politics at the Santana School of Advanced Studies in Pisa. And I would like to share with you an overview of what's going on in my research project there, and the main contribution, the main aims, and the results till now. Basically, the main topic of the research project is about refugee protection in the EU and cooperation. And as we all know, when we talk about migration and asylum in the EU, we have to distinguish some elements and some domains. So we can talk about illegal migration, labor migration, and so on. So this is specific research focuses on refugee protection and how member states' perception of refugee protection can change cooperation or not at EU level. So the main question here is why there are some member states that during the refugee crisis have been cooperating in refugee protection, and other member states have not been cooperating in this topic. We can talk about so many elements that could lead to these differences in cooperating or not. For instance, elements such as identities or new member states or the rise of populism, populist political parties, and so on. But what I would like to do during this project is to analyze these differences in cooperation through a global public good perspective. So what could be interesting is to see to what extent member states see refugee protection as a global public good or not, or this can lead to a cooperation at EU level or remain a national responses. Here, for instance, we have a little background of the main EU legal measures during the refugee crisis. So as we can see here, during the year 2015, we can see the main coming of the major influx of refugees that cross the Mediterranean Sea, and how the most important legal EU measures of burden sharing, refugee protection, burden sharing have made during this period. So the main point is that the emergency relocations chain, it was not voluntary, it was like kind of binding character, but there were some member states coming from the Visegrad part of the EU that were completely reluctant to allocate refugees. And also, after that, we could see that during the year 2016, these member states proposed to reduce the character of the binding character of the legal measure to allocate refugees, and instead of that, to transform it in a voluntary, just in a voluntary character. No. So in this period, Germany and other northern member states were so happy to allocate refugees, and other member states, most of them coming from the eastern part of Europe, they were not so just say happy to allocate them. So as I've said before, there are so many dynamics behind these changes in cooperation. But the main point could be like also how these member states could see within a dynamic of cost benefits and global public good perspective refugee protection for their own countries. So During the recent years, there have been several scholars that have identified the refugee protection as a global public good, but they have been studying, for instance, peace, global peace, and to make in comparison with other elements of international cooperation, such as global peace, and how the provision of global peace as a global public good could be through building peacekeeping building operations. So some EU scholars have tried to make some comparisons in order to transform this conceptual idea into more empirical analysis. So in this case, for instance, to what extent we could consider the Dublin system in the EU such as a tool or instrument in order to provide the final global public good that would be refugee protection. So basically, the main contribution of this research would be to provide a more empirical overview, a more empirical analysis of this conceptual framework by doing some content analysis of the policy documents of the case studies selected, and also being supported by in-depth interviews with experts and politicians of the main political parties that have been ruled the case studies that would be the main countries, Germany, Italy, and Poland. And also, it's very challenging because we can see this research doesn't talk. It talks about the refugee and migration, but also the point that the main theoretical perspective is coming from IR and economics background. And also we could see that the context itself is about EU studies, and also the indicators and the variable in this case would be the ruling political parties and governments in Italy, Germany, and Poland. So what has been done till now is the link conceptual analysis. As we can see here, we have refugee protection and burden sharing. The definition of what refugee protection is, we could see by the United Nations Geneva Convention, such as also, for instance, from the European Union, and what public good and collective action is. So in this case, public goods have two main characteristics that are non-rebellious and non-excludable. So in this case also have been identified how refugee protection, allocating refugees, could be beneficial for other countries from other member states, even if these member states are not allocating in the territories, but also the problem of free reading arises here. So one member state could not allocate refugees, but instead of that could be benefit and taking advantage of this situation, no? And the dependent variable and independent variable in this case, to what extent refugee protection has been identified as a global public good as well, and in this case, how seeing this as a global public good could lead to a more cooperation at EU level. So member states could enhance a collective action. The main research theories are, to both of them, very important to link the conceptual analysis. The first one would be liberal institutionalism, that basically connects the public good concept and the international international cooperation. So in this case, states' mistrust could not lead to an international cooperation. In the case of the European Union, for instance, if member states could not trust themselves, they are not going to cooperate at EU level in refugee protection terms. And the second one is liberal intergovernmentalism. Basically, this is more one of the main theories in the European integration processes. So also we could say that the more cooperating in the refugee protection, the more we could talk about an integration process in asylum and migration policy domain. So it's not just about cooperation between member states, but public goods perspective in other fields, as for instance also environmental policies or for instance economic policies in the European Union could give us an overview of how integration processes in different policy domains of the European Union are completely in different steps. For instance, in the case of environmental policy, we can say that there is a more integrative policy domain, but for instance, in the terms of asylum and migration in the EU, we don't have an integration policy domain. So how to personalize it, as I said before, is a little bit challenging because we have to look at, I could try to make both quantitative and qualitative analysis. Could be both frame analysis of policy documents and party manifestos of the political parties and national governments in Italy, Germany, and Poland, and also a content analysis of frequency words and see the categorization of what public good is, what security is, and so on. And after that, it's very important to support the main source of analysis with in-depth interview to experts and politicians in three topics, like migration, asylum, EU affairs, and the security. So the timeline is from 2013 till 2018. There has been the increase of the refugee crisis, and the rationale of taking these countries, these member states as case studies is basically because we have Germany as a northern member state, old member state, and there has been no shift in the government because we are talking that Merkel's government has been ruling since the refugee crisis started. Italy, in which we have a shift of government in the recent last year, with the government of Salvini, populist political party, political. Actually, it's not. Yeah, okay. And so the shift in the government, and because before we had the PD, we have the pro-European government, and now completely different, and also an old member state and southern member state. And Poland, there is a completely new member state in the European Union, and also we have this change, this shift of government with the platform and justice and law government. So could be very interesting to see in how this shift of governments during the refugee crisis could have changed the modification of perceptions refugees for refugee protection as a global public good. And I would like to finish with a summary of the research. Here we could see like how national governments could see refugee protection as a global public good through a cost benefits framework, and also so the more they see it as a global public good, the more they are going to cooperate and EU level, as the EU legal measures are completely voluntary in refugee protection terms. So thank you very much for your attention, and so.
Thank you very much. We are really curious about the results of the last two projects, actually, because does it? Yeah. We are made curious to see the results of these two projects that have been presented in the last half hour. So we wish you good success there. The interesting thing, before there was also a presentation of, let's say, the financial means by the EU in this particular field. We could add maybe that the two projects were probably also part of the extra means that the EU has set into the research area since 2015. So that completes your overview of, let's say, the research, the resources put in by the EU.
Welcome everyone. I am deeply grateful for the possibility to talk to you today about the topic that I find extremely interesting and relevant for the managing of immigration by the EU, namely the EU anti-discrimination law, as a tool for tackling the challenges caused by the migration that EU and its member states are facing nowadays. In fact, the EU is able to use its anti-discrimination provisions in order to regulate the status of third country nationals residing in the territory of the EU, residing in the territory of the EU member states, and thus limiting the discretion of the member states with respect to this. This link between migration and discrimination is not only theoretical, it's also practical, as it is proved by the second survey on discrimination and hate crime against Jews in the EU. The results of the survey, published in 2018, revealed that ethnic origin and immigrant background are grounds for discrimination faced both by the EU citizens and third country nationals living in the EU territory. Thus, the EU anti-discrimination law can and in fact plays a vital role for tackling the immigration challenges. The EU anti-discrimination law is the set of legal norms guaranteeing the right to equality, so the right to being treated in a similar situation to in a similar way to the person being in a similar situation, unless otherwise justified. The EU anti-discrimination law is quite complex set of legal norms represented by inter alia by Article 21 of the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the European Union that guarantees or prohibits the discrimination based on any ground, many of which are quite important for the protection of the third country nationals. Let's take into account the race, the ethnic origin, the religion, or the membership of a national minority as a protected characteristic, protected against discrimination under this constitutional provision of the EU anti-discrimination law. We have to keep in mind that among beneficiaries of the protection against discrimination based on these grounds, there are third country nationals, irrespective of the legality of their stay in the territory of the European Union. Therefore, they can also invoke the protection against discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin that is granted under Directive 2043. This directive, as an instrument of EU anti-discrimination law, is quite interesting for several reasons. First, because it is the first EU anti-discrimination directive adopted on the basis of Article 19 TFEU, former Article 13 TEC. One of the main successful EU attempts to shift competence from the national level to the level of the EU with regard to the integration of migrants. Secondly, because this is the first legally binding instrument of EU anti-racism policy, binding both on the member states directly and on the individuals coming from the member states indirectly. The rationale behind the directive was twofold. First, the economic justification. Discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin may undermine the achievement of the objectives of the EC Treaty, nowadays TFEU, in particular the attainment of a high level of employment and of social protection, the rising of the standard of living and quality of life, and economic and social cohesion. But behind the directive, there are also political reasons. The protection against discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin is the requirement to ensure the development of democratic and tolerant societies which allow the participation of all persons irrespective of their racial or ethnic origin. In order to achieve this political aim of inclusion, the protection against discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin should go beyond the area of employment and should cover areas such as education, social protection, including social security, or an access to goods and services, what is reflected in the material scope of application of the Directive 2043. When it comes to the purpose of this directive, it is to lay down a framework for combating discrimination on the grounds of racial or ethnic origin, with a view to putting into effect in the member states the principle of equal treatment. In order to achieve this aim, the directive imposes on the member states several obligations. For example, the obligation to ensure that any laws, regulation and administrative provisions contrary to the principle of equal treatment irrespective of racial or ethnic origin are abolished, as well as to ensure that any provisions contrary to this principle, which are included, for example, in individual or collective contracts or agreements, are or may be declared null and void, or that they are amended. The directive prohibits several different forms of unequal treatment. It prohibits direct discrimination, so the situation in which one person is treated less favorably than another has been, or would be treated in a comparable situation because of his or her racial or ethnic origin. We have to keep in mind that thanks to the excessive interpretation given to this term, the term of direct discrimination by the Court of Justice of the European Union, direct discrimination covers also declarations made publicly by an employer that he will not recruit employees of a certain ethnic or racial origin. In a case of Ferrin, these were third country nationals coming from Morocco, which undoubtedly increase the protection and enhance the status of third country nationals in the EU labour market. The directive prohibits also indirect discrimination, so a situation in which a neutral provision is applied, what means that there is no direct discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin, but as the result, the disadvantage is suffered by a person of concrete social or ethnic origin, unless the provision, criterion or practice is objectively justified by a legitimate aim and the means of achieving that aim are proportionate and necessary. And once again, I would like to make a reference to the Court of Justice case of Chess, in which the court explained that in order to be justified and proportionate, the practice at issue must not go beyond what is appropriate and necessary to achieve those legitimate aims. And this is not so if it is found that other appropriate and less restrictive means enabling those aims to be achieved exist, or if these means are of an offensive or stigmatizing nature. What undoubtedly increase the protection given to the third country nationals, in that sense that also stereotypes may be treated as a source of discrimination faced by third country national that is prohibited under the Directive 2043. When it comes to the material scope of application of the prohibition of discrimination, it is quite wide. In fact, it is the widest scope of application of the prohibition of discrimination as compared to any other protected characteristics under EU law. as the prohibition of racial or ethnic discrimination applies to condition for access to employment, access to all types and all levels of vocational guidance and vocational training, employment and working conditions, including dismissal and pay, membership of and involvement in an organization of workers and employers, as well as to areas other than employment, namely social protection, including social security and healthcare, social advantages, education, and access to goods and services which are available to the public. This is the result of the political decision, of a political choice to protect individuals, also those coming from third countries, to the widest extent in the EU anti-discrimination law. Why? Because the Directive 2043 was the EU response to the threat of European Union values in the form of the Haider's right-wing party that won elections in Austria in 1999, the party that was openly anti-immigration and anti-EU. As a result of this political choice, there is a hierarchy of protected grounds under EU anti-discrimination law, with racial and ethnic origin at the very top of this protection. Apart from this wide scope of application of the prohibition of discrimination that member states must apply in practice, they are also obliged to designate a body or bodies for the promotion of equal treatment of all persons without discrimination on the grounds of racial or ethnic origin, as well as to introduce effective, proportionate and dissuasive sanctions which may comprise the payment of compensation to the victim of discrimination. These kinds of obligations interfere with the principle of procedural and institutional autonomy of the member states, limiting its freedom to construct their structure of the public bodies in order to achieve the aim of the protection against discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin. When it comes to the scope of the protection of third country nationals against discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin, one provision of the directive at issue must be highlighted. It is Article 3.2 that introduced the exception. It states that the directive does not cover difference of treatment based on nationality and is without prejudice to the provisions and conditions relating to the entry into and residence of third country nationals and stateless persons on the territory of member states, as well as to any treatment which arises from the legal status of third country nationals and stateless person concerned. This is the explicit exclusion of migration law from the substantive scope of application of the Directive 2043. As a result of this exemption, discrimination of third country national based on their nationality is acceptable under the directive unless it results in their discrimination based on racial or ethnic origin. This provision is criticized by the doctrine as diminishing the protection granted to the third country nationals under the EU anti-discrimination law. To conclude, the EU anti-discrimination law is potentially a powerful tool for managing relations between majority group from host member state and the migrant minority group. The aim of the EU anti-discrimination law is the social inclusion of migrants, what requires eradication of harmful stereotypes. And the regulation of the legal status of third country nationals through the EU anti-discrimination law result in limiting the freedom of discretion granted to the member states in this respect. Thank you very much for your attention. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.
Quick questions before we go to lunch. There's one there. Could you
Thank you for your insightful lectures. My name is Anthony Ohepusi. I'm a Nigerian and also an immigrant. So I've seen a lot of positive efforts and projects by the European Union on migration, social inclusion, integration. I'm a student of the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. So we have in Lublin, we have this open integration. We have also the Rule of Law Institute, all making efforts. Yes, but why this negative vibe and negative feeling about migration? Why? I'm curious about that because when we talk about migration, especially with regard to Europe, it's all about the negatives. And this is not only about coming from the maybe anti-immigration nationalistic politics, like the populist politics, where they say everything negative. No. But also from the European Union's attitude and approach of being defensive as regards migration. So, my question is, how much effort has the European Union made to change this narrative? And also, to what extent has the European Union made effort to promote the positive effects of migration as against the populist anti-immigration politics, with its scaremongering and exaggerated negative impressions about migration and migrants?
Thank you. And there's a difficult question to ask to who, because it is a rather general question. Let me collect one or two other questions if there are, and if not, there are two questions, one there and one upstairs, and then I'll give the floor.
Thank you. My name is Edina. I'm from University of Oradea, and I would like to address my question to Professor Malgorzata. So, Professor, you were talking about the financial incentives that the European Union has in order to help this refugee, this stalemate. I would like to ask you whether there is information that in the next multi-annual financial framework about the amount of money and, for example, the funds that are going to be available in order to help to boost legal channels of migration. For example, if they're allocated money in the eventuality of a next flow of third country nationals. And again, in 2016, everyone knows that there has been this rather controversial deal between the European Union and Turkey, and about the 6 billion euros that were allocated for Turkey, somehow to close the facet and not to allow the people to come. So for where were this money allocated from? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Maja Rynko, Warsaw School of Economics and National Bank of Poland. And my job in the bank is about looking at the labor market in Poland. So what happens now in the labor market in Poland? We have around 1,800,000 different estimates of Ukrainians in Poland. And what the government does to integrate the Ukrainians here is probably not much. So my question is also to the first presenter. Are there any examples of usage of the European social funds to integrate Ukrainians or other migrants in Poland? if you know about any action, any usage of this money. Thank you.
Okay, I propose that Professor Malgorzata Djamili starts with the easy question, that is the finances, and maybe then also takes care a little bit of the second question, or the last question about social funds and Poland, and that we then turn to the big question, Anthony's big question, and see whether we can answer part of it by you two. Okay.
And so thank you very much for those questions that was what was given, that was put. And as regards this multi-annual financial perspectives, so regarding the current financial perspective, these funds are given not directly to refugees as far as structural funds are concerned, but as I mentioned, to create a good environment as regards the European Regional Development Fund for promotion, for integration the refugees as asylum seekers into the labor market, and only those funds which are related. Let's say, not related to the cohesion policy, are given the direct assistance, and of course, so those funds are focused on inclusion, or just to integrate this group of people into the community, into the labor market, by offering them. By integrate them efficiently into the community, into the labor market, just to improve their skills, to recognize their qualifications, and also to improve the collaboration between the institutions and employers, and some institutions. Regarding the next financial perspective, I don't really know, just I can admit what's going on, but what should be finally decided. But for sure, what is included in the multi-annual financial perspective, big accent placed on cities, and as there are some problems in cities regarding the poverty. So if the state indicates that it also the problems refers to refugees, migrants, I think that it could be included into the operational program. So in that sense, I mean, these are because I didn't mention that each state will indicate what kind of target group could be included in the operational programs. So there could be identify such group of people which should be included into the community. So the main problem is just the social inclusion, and if it is related to this group of people, of course, they could be included in those programs. And as regarding this programs related to Poland, I don't really know what about the Ukrainians and how about the programs, and so I don't really know about how to answer your questions.
If somebody knows,
if somebody knows, they could help me.
The one. Okay, thank you, Carolina. What could we say on the basis of response, what you did until now, as an answer to Anthony's question? Why this negative vibe, and what did the European Union to change the framing of all of this?
I will say it this way. Let's start from defining points in this question. Because, okay, European Union, so what does it mean? We are European Union, actually. And what do we do when to talk positively about migration? All the day today, we were talking about migration crisis. And this is our language. Crisis is quite pejorative. I intentionally did not use migration crisis in my presentation. I was talking about the huge or big number of people who are going towards Europe, reaching for shelter. And from my point of view, if we will start from changing how we are talking about migration, then this European language will change as well. Because why this movement of people, this was the first challenge, how to welcome them, how to receive them, what can we do for them. But then appeared another issues. They are already here. How we are going to integrate, if we are going to integrate them. There are other issues, how we are going to create social attitudes towards migrants. The politician language, it's not only they thought about this. Politicians respond towards the needs or the language that came from the society. This is double-linked dialogue because they respond for the language or the attitudes and in the same way create them. But this is how does it work. And on the other hand, this project, Respond project, is one of the ways how funds from European Union go into those processes that are in the Europe and neighborhood in order to understand those processes, also in dialogue, in discourse, and maybe somehow, if it will be possible, react for them in a more positive way.
Thank you. Diego, what is your answer to Anthony?
Okay. Anthony, thank you very much for your question. It's a very tricky one, very difficult, but I'm going to try to give my personal overview. Well, we have to when we talk about the default list of the EU or the default list of the national governments in migration terms, we should be aware that when we talk about migration asylum, competencies are most of them remaining at the national level. So in this case, what the EU could or can is trying to do is exercising a soft power again, within the national governments, because as far as the migration asylum policy remain competencies of national governments, the EU cannot do so much. So they can, it can be, like being done some soft power against Hungarian government, also some sanctions, but it's very complex because of this. No, it's not shared. It's not a shared 100% shared policy. And also, I agree with you that maybe in external action, the EU could be some more effort, like kind of, for instance, Turkey or Libya or so on. But the main problem is still there. It's like competencies are at the national level, so it's very, very, very difficult because member states don't agree with sharing refugees, or the EU cannot do practically nothing. So that's the point. Yeah.
Thank you. May I add a few sentences in answer to Anthony, which really connects to what I said this morning. On the one hand, your first question, why this negative vibe? I tried to make clear this morning that immigration in Europe has taken place, but not as an intention of the countries. The countries needed the people, but did not call themselves immigration countries. This is this ambivalence that was there from the beginning. It has been very much reinforced in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years by nationalistic tendencies, exactly opposing the developments that took place at the European Union. There is a clear relation between upcoming nationalism, including upcoming populism in politics, in quite a number of particularly Western European countries, but also Central European countries. Nationalism that has two big points. One is so-called protection of their own identity, which means seeing immigrants as a threat to that identity, and then trying to get that under control as much as possible. These are things that we cannot deny. These things happen. And they are now in a phase in which the integration of 28 countries within Europe is becoming fragile. Brexit is not an accident. It it is part of this general movement. That's one of the stories. The second question was, what did the European Union or the European Commission itself? The problem of the European Commission, both in the field of doing immigration policies and even more in the field of doing integration policies, is that they cannot do more than what they are allowed to do by the member states. Here we go. What we have seen is that in integration policies, the strict, mandatory integration policies that have come into existence since the end of the last century, beginning, has come from Northwest European countries and are uploaded to the European level. The Dutch have been very important. They had a different kind of policy earlier, but they have the strict kind of integration courses, the mandatory ones, in this neoliberal climate in which the migrant has to do it all themselves and pay themselves. This whole idea is relatively new, and it's uploaded by, it started with Denmark, the Netherlands, followed by other countries, and used as a kind of way to select those migrants that were willing to become, let's say, a citizen in the country they were, adapt themselves. It was assimilation. So this is what actually happened, and the EU was in a very difficult position to maneuver in these kind of things. If you see what they have done in integration policies, they had mobilized all kind of soft tools in order to create, let's say, a context in which there would be a kind of welcoming integration policies in the nations. But they were not successful because there were counterpowers from national governments who uploaded their views on integration policies, and they became more dominant. So the battle, the question, what did the EU do itself, is also a question of what did the different member states in their functioning within the EU. And that's probably the most difficult part of the story. I'm sorry, this is what my vision is and my answer to your question. It's a difficult answer, I guess, but I think we are now ready for lunch, are we?
Thank you very much. I'm happy that there was a good follow-up and discussion after these three presentations. So now, as Professor Rinus announced, we are ready to enjoy our lunch. But because really we are a bit in a hurry, but it's positive because it means that we are involved in these discussions, I would like to have you here back in 35 to 40 minutes. It should be fine. So please enjoy your speedy lunch with a cup of coffee or tea or fresh juice, and be back here. We will start 3:20, okay? In the meantime, we would like to ask those speakers that has not yet uploaded their presentation to do it during the lunch, and then we will start full of good mood.